Hey guys, how's it going? Value Venture Investing here today. So today we're talking about Virgin Galactic, SPCE. Now they just had their Q4 2023 earnings. Looks like after hours, the stock basically just gave up what it gave today. So not so positive after the market here, but there's some interesting things here, and I'm maybe a little bit more bullish on this company now. So what I've done for you guys here, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, this is all 2023. We can see the whole year. And we can also see on a year-over-year basis. We're going to get more in-depth into these financials. But in terms of this quarter, we had about $2.8 million in revenue, a little bit over than that. They're quoting as $3 million. I don't know why they're always not doing this exact. They seem to be a couple $100 million off, or a couple $100,000 off rather, on one given number or the other. Net income was a loss of $102 million. It was actually probably the best loss of all, the entire year. Of course, and it was even better on a year-over-year perspective. $102 million, still a lot of money to be losing. And cash, they're sitting about $945 million. Keep in mind here that they do quote this as a bigger number as well, but that's because they're including restricted cash. So this has remained constant for me. This has been dropping a little bit, but we saw in about Q3, Q2, it's hitting its peak, pretty comparable to the year over year here. But the main thing here they said is that they figure that they're going to have sufficient liquidity to ramp up even more of their manufacturing here. So it shouldn't be something to worry about as well. So if we look on a year-over-year basis, might be kind of interesting. Huge revenue increase there, 869,000 versus 2.8 million. Net income was actually slightly less of a loss as well, and like I said, cash is pretty much in line as well. So then when we went into the presentation here, there's a couple things that they said to begin with on the conference call that I found interesting. I'm just going to go over those now rather than at the end of the video. They basically said that the Delta class is still on track for commercial service in 2026. They're going to reopen their sales around that time. So they're not taking any more sales right now. They also talked a little bit about how they've had 32 total people go to space, and that's a certain percentage. I didn't catch it. 5% or 10% or whatever it was of the total people in the history of the world that have ever been to space. Kind of interesting. Galactic 7 is going to be later this year. This is going to be with researchers and private astronauts. One of the analysts, I believe, was saying it was Q1 or Q2. There wasn't much color on that, so I'd expect that to be later in the year. This is going to be average around $800,000 per seat. They have a backlog of about 725 astronauts, so they're not going to be opening up yet, but they still have those house seats that they talked about last quarter, where they can essentially, I guess, squeak somebody in, and they've opened that price. They've opted up to $600,000 per seat, and so that is now in line with the research flights price. Another great thing is that they did not dilute this quarter, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. They included some photos here of people on the flights, so I didn't include all the slides because some of it is just kind of fluff here. This one was the most interesting slide of the whole thing, and they kind of expanded on this a little bit later as well. So they're hoping to have about 2 motherships, 4 to 5 Delta class ships per spaceport. They're going to have about 300 to 400 flights per year on an optimal utilization. That remains to be seen because we're so far off that as well. And they're basically saying that they could have multiple spaceports around the world. So now, how does that actually translate? So like I said, 300 to 400 flights per year at about $600K a seat is what they're saying. They also talked about demand and said that they have very low, even with just one spaceport, I believe it's just a teeny percentage of their extrapolated demand for space flight for these types of flights. So anyway, that would give them about roughly $1 billion a year per space flight. And they're talking about building tons. Now we're kind of way off that, right? The Delta itself will bring about $3.6 million per flight. So that's where you get that $1 billion. So that kind of puts this a little bit more into perspective. We're at about $759 million market cap. If you start seeing those numbers, then we could be seeing this share price go up significantly. But it makes me really think that this is just a really long-term horizon thing. Like, to get to that point where we have that kind of flight cadence and then we're opening multiples to, drive this market cap to 5 billion, 10 billion, we might be waiting for a while, guys. So anyway, The other thing that they mentioned as well is 2029 is likely the second spaceport. So take that into account. 2029. So even best case scenario, we're getting 300-400 flights per year, getting that $1 billion a year. We're generating $1 billion in revenue. We're probably not going to see more than that until beyond 2029. So take that into account when looking at the share price. So for me right now, I'm just holding my stock. I'm not buying anymore. It's still probably pretty fairly valued where it's at right now. So now they went into a little bit about the actual design, manufacturing of the Delta, basically saying how they have these kind of forms here that just kind of work as forms to make it more efficient. He talked about this for quite some time. They also talked about in their main headquarters here, they have a test pilot training simulator. So that's something as well that they talked about. So now going into their financial results here, like we said, I don't know why they always do this. They had revenue of $3 million. Well, it was about $2.8 million. This is compared to $1 million in the prior year. So that was the prior year quarter. So that was driven primarily due to commercial space flights and membership fees relating to future astronauts. That's what they always say. Operating expenses were 117 million compared to 154 million, so that's dropped quite a bit as well. So they had a net loss of 104 million compared to 151 million the year prior. A lot of people want to be looking at free cash flow here. Free cash flow was a negative 114 million compared to 135 million dollars in the previous quarter year. I also want to mention here that that's actually below their guidance. Last quarter they guided for about 125 to 135 million dollar loss. So that's really good that they actually came in under. So their future guidance, we know that they're conservative. Although they guided for $3 million in revenue, well, they said that they made $3 million in revenue, but they technically made less. So I'm assuming that they're right in line with their guidance. It's just what I'm assuming there. Now when we look at this on year-over-year basis here, revenue $7 million. Well, it wasn't quite $7 million compared to $2 million. That's not right on either, but we'll get to that as well. The year before. So that's pretty big, huge increase in revenue, but still it's not good enough to drive that stock. We still need to be really ramping up and seeing what we're doing this year. Total operating expenses for the year, $538 million compared to $502 million previous year. Net loss of $502 million compared to $500 million prior year. Yeah, we're going to see the loss. Oops, sorry about that. We're going to see the loss is going to increase considering how much they're spending on ramping up here. Free cash flow, negative 493 million compared to 397 million prior year. So we've seen a little bit of an increase there as well. Also want to mention, I've already kind of mentioned it, they raised $484 million in terms of diluting their stocks. They did speak about how they will be doing that in the future, but not anytime soon. Of course, they're going to have to if they ramp like that, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well. Now, like I said, it's not quite in line actually how much cash they have here. They say they had $982 million. Well, that is including restricted cash. So we've seen that actually, go up just slightly. Free cash flow for Q4 2023 it was $114 million loss. And for the full year, it's $493 million. We talked about that. Now guidance. So I guess we could be pretty much in line with this. They're expecting for Q1 of 2024, so this next quarter here, 125 million to 135 million. That's exactly what they said last quarter, and we got 114. So I'd expect maybe it to be somewhere in between those. Who knows? Now I wanted to just talk about this a little bit as well. I know that part of the screen is probably missing at the bottom here, but I'll just zoom in. This is just kind of a little bit better representation if you want to look at it. The actual financials, like I said, it was about 2.8 million. Versus the quarter before 869 million. On the year-over-year basis is probably something you haven't seen because I gave you that other spreadsheet. Revenue was about 6.8 million for the full year versus 2.3 million for the full year. So we got a net loss of about $502 million for the full year versus 500. So pretty much in line there. You can see that the basic and diluted shares is there as well. So overall, it wasn't a terrible quarter. I think the most exciting thing for me was looking at their plans. This slide right here, where they could actually start generating some revenue, but we need to be able to see that. Like that's pretty far in the future, and they need to start really just driving those space flights and getting that cadence up. So anyway, I'd love to know what you guys think. If you're holding, you're buying stock, or what you're doing with it, how you think the quarter was. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Helps me out a lot. And that'll be it for today. I'll see you in the next one.